Today I'll be talking. Today I'll be talking. Yeah. So I'm Prakash. Today I'll be talking about parity games on multi-push down system. Of course, this talk will be slightly orthogonal to other talks that you have seen in this workshop. But it's interesting to see the game setting on verification from the verification scenario, and that is what we'll be doing today. This is joint work with Ahmed Bojani, Narayan Kumar, and Mohammad Fauziati. So I'll just give you an introduction of what we'll be seeing during this talk. We'll be looking at what parity games are. Then I'll be showing to you what multi-push down system is, and then I'll also be showing to you parity games on multi-push down systems. So we'll start with parity games. Parity games are basically played on graphs. The graph can be finite or infinite. For our example, we'll take a finite graph. For a moment, forget about these colors. You have two types of vertices, the circular vertices and the squarish vertices. So these the circular vertices belong to a particular player called player 0, and the squarish vertex belong to a player called player 1. And this is a game between two players. Now coming to the colors, there are finitely many colors which are ordered, and each of them is partitioned according to which player it belongs to. And the game goes as such. There is a designated initial vertex, and there is a token, and the player to which that vertex belongs to moves the token, and the game continues infinitely. And considering one such infinite run, consider the least color that occurred in this infinite run, and look at to which player that color belongs to. So that determines who wins the game. Yes. Least color that occurs infinitely often, and look at to which player the color belongs to, and that determines who wins the game. And we say from a vertex, a particular player wins if he has a strategy to win the game. Now coming to multi-push down systems. Before coming to multi-push down system, I'll give you motivation on why we need to study such structures. A multi-push down system is useful for verification of programs. We'll see why. But we are basically interested in a particular kind of program called concurrent recursive program. These concurrent recursive programs are programs with multiple threads. The threads can have recursion, they have finite data domain, and they communicate with each other using shared memory. So traditionally, if you take a sequential recursive program, push down systems were were used to model such programs. So it is quite natural to consider multi-push down system to model concurrent recursive programs. I'll just define to you what a multi-push down system is. So a multi-push down system is nothing but it has a set of stacks, set of states, set of stack alphabets partitioned according to which stack they belong to. So this belongs to stack 1, these two belongs to stack 2, and these two belongs to stack 3. And there are a set of transitions. A configuration of a multi-push down system is a state plus the content of the stack. And a transition can relate to two configurations if head part of the transition is the same as the state of first configuration, and we get the other configuration by replacing the state of the configuration with the tail part of the transition and applying the stack operation to the stack of the first configuration. So for example, if we have this configuration and if we apply this transition, we go to this configuration where we replace the state with Q and do the operation on the stack 1. And we can have sequence of configurations. We call it a run if we have a sequence of configurations and the adjacent configurations are related by a transition. For our talk, we will abstract the stack operations of a particular run using this notation, where a circle with an up arrow means push onto stack 1, and a circle with a down arrow means pop from stack 2. Of course, multi-push down system even with two stacks become Turing powerful. So we need to identify some subclass of multi-push down system that has decidable properties. There are various subclasses which have decidable properties. We'll be in this talk we'll be concentrating on two such subclasses, namely bounded context and bounded phase. So a bounded so each of these subclasses basically what they do is they take this multi-push down system and restrict their attention to a subset of the runs, where a bounded context system restricts its attention to runs of the form that can be seen as concatenation of bounded number of contexts, where a context is a sequence of operations restricted to a particular stack. So I'll give an example of, we'll look at this with an example. So this is a 6 context run where these two are operations on stack 1, this is an operation on stack 2, this is an operation on stack 3 and so on. So this is a run which has at most 6 contexts. This can be seen as concatenation of at most 6 contexts. Similarly, this slightly more complicated example where this can be seen as again concatenation of 6 context, where this is a context where all operations happen on stack 1, this is a context where all operations happen on stack 2 and so on. A bounded phase system is slightly generalization of bounded context where we allow pushes to other stacks. So it can be seen as concatenation of bounded number of phases, where phase is a sequence of stack operations where the pop is restricted to a single stack. So phase is a sequence of operation where pop operation is restricted to a stack. We'll look at this with the help of an example. So this is a one phase run. So though there are operations to many stack, if you see all pops are done only to stack 2, whereas we have a lot of pushes to other stack. So this is a one phase run of a system. Similarly, this is a 3-phase run of a system because we do a pop here from stack 2 and we do a pop from stack 1. So these two cannot be in the same phase. So we have these two have to belong to a different phase. So now we'll look at parity games on bounded phase. Before I actually go into the details, now I have to define what the graphs of bounded phase system looks like. So for that we'll look at a configuration of a bounded phase. The configuration of a bounded phase includes the state, the content of the stack, the number of phases still remaining for it to exhaust all its phases, and currently active stack, which is denoted by this slightly shaded stack. So yeah, this is the state, you have the number of phases remaining, you have the stacks, and a configuration graph of a bounded phase system will look like this, which is basically collection of configurations, and there is an edge between two configurations if they are related by a transition. For example, let's try to understand this configuration graph. Of course, we have all states Q, but this is just an example. You can have different states. So these two are related by a pop operation on stack 1. So since it is a pop operation on the currently active stack, we do not change the phase. We do not exhaust one phase. Similarly, this is a push onto stack 3, and hence we do not exhaust the phase. Whereas if you see here, we actually pop from stack 2, whereas the currently active stack is stack 1. So we will have to switch stack and we exhaust one token and we go to the next configuration. Similarly, here we again change the currently active stack and we have to exhaust one token and go. And we go on like this. So from here, when we do switch to this configuration, we have no more phases left. So we can essentially we cannot further switch our stack. We will have to restrict our operations to this last stack. Pardon?
Pop operations are restricted to this.
Yes, both push and pop operations are restricted. You can always push to other stacks, but it doesn't matter much because you can always put it on your state. You can keep the elements pushed onto other stacks in your state. Basically, you don't use this stack ever. You will never go and pop from this particular stack. Similarly, I'll also explain to you how a configuration graph of bounded context system looks like. Now, in our bounded phase, we could basically push into other stack and not exhaust our phase. Whereas here, each time we push into another stack, our currently active stack changes and we exhaust one context. And the rest of it is actually much similar, very similar to what we saw earlier. So clearly it's quite evident that bounded context is much weaker than bounded phase system. Bounded phase system generalizes bounded context system. And before we go into parity games, I would like to say one thing. Yes?
From the last phase, can we not keep copying it from the active state?
Yeah, you can use this as a push-down system. I'm saying that you cannot use any of the grade stacks. So of course, this is a push-down system from here on. So one thing I would like to say about these restrictions is these are quite natural restrictions, because you can always make sure that, when you are executing such programs in your computer, you can always make sure that your scheduler keeps track of either context or phase and does not allow a context switch after it exhausts the phases. So this is a very natural restriction where you can actually implement such restrictions. Yeah, so now we'll go to parity games on bounded phase systems.
Characterization of programs with concurrent recursive threads with bounded context, bounded phase.
No, as far as I know, no. So you can look at this as an under approximation technique, where you can actually use this to find a bug. If there is a bug here, then you know that there is a bug in the original program. But if there is no bug here, you cannot say anything about the original program. So you can actually use this as an under approximation technique.
So I'm wondering whether the bounded phase and context can be controlled tactically from the program in some way, or
From the scheduler, yes, but from program, I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll talk about parity games on the bounded phase systems. So parity games on bounded phase multi-push-down system is decidable. This was proved by Anil Seth in one of his paper, where he had a non-elementary complexity and he left the actual complexity open. So what we will be seeing is not that proof, because that proof is very tough and it's quite complicated. What he does is he tries to reduce parity games on bounded phase multi-push-down system directly onto a very complex finite state graph. What we'll be looking at is a more inductive way of finding a solution to this problem. And so one advantage of our method is we can also have a global model checking of parity games. By global model checking of parity games, what I mean is, given a graph and given a node, from that node we can decide whether one of the player is winning. Whereas, the traditional Anil Seth construction can only decide from the initial node. So we will be using this particular theorem for our inductive construction, which says that set of all winning positions of player 0 or player 1 in a parity game played on push-down graph is regular, which means that I have a finite state automaton which recognizes the configuration and tells me whether this configuration is winning for player 0 or it is winning for player 1. Yeah, so this was result separately by Kasha and Vardy. So let's take our bounded phase structure. So what we can observe here is these positions are basically push-down systems. These you cannot switch stack from here. These positions can only operate on one stack from here on. So what we know about these things are these are push-down systems. And from our previous theorem, we know that we can decide whether this is losing or winning based on the content of the currently active stack. But the problem is we don't know what is there on the stack unless we pop all the stacks. So the idea is basically to build the finite state automaton into your system so that you keep it running along with your stack, alongside your stack, and by just looking at the top of the stack, you will know what state it is for that particular stack, and based on the top of the stack, you can decide whether it is winning or losing. Now if you see, you can actually eliminate one phase out of this whole structure. You don't need, you can actually operate on a system which consumes one phase less. And now you know that these are pushed on configurations, and you can actually now decide whether these are winning or losing using the same technique. And you can keep going on till you get a one-phase system, but one-phase system is essentially a push-down system. So what is the complexity of such a construction? Again, we get a non-elementary complexity. Why? Because each time we have to, so the construction given by Vardy or Kasha is basically exponential in size. So each time you have to eliminate one phase and build that system into your, build that finite state automata into your system. You blow up your system by exponential size. And each time for each phase you keep blowing up and you get a non-elementary complexity.
Each time you have to accommodate the automata, it's clear. Why does it?
Because it depends on the configuration. It actually depends on the configuration. You need to build it, you need to blow up your stack size. So you'll have a gamma across the finite state automata. So complexity of such construction is non-elementary. Now the question is, can we do better? The answer happens to be no. So we show that, this complexity is actually tight. So we'll show that satisfiability of first order formula on natural numbers can be reduced to parity games on bounded phase systems. So the idea is very simple. Okay, so we know that this problem has a non-elementary complexity from Stockmeyer's thesis. So the idea is very simple. So we'll take a first order formula in Prinix normal form. There are a set of variables. These variables can be classified as existential variable or for all variables. So whenever it is an existential variable, player 0 decides the valuation. Whenever there is a for all variable, player 1 decides the valuation. So let's see how these people give the valuations. So since x1 is a existential variable, player 0 decides a valuation. He decides some number n. He pushes n number of symbols into the stack and puts a plate labeled with x1. The next one is a for all variable. So player 1 actually does the same thing. Now next variable is x3, but you see it need not be that every variable is above every other variable. You can also have some valuation, they can also decide some variation in between. But that is not a problem. You can always copy elements because of bounded phase. You can always push into other stacks without changing your phase. So he'll decide some appropriate valuation, put the plate inside and copy back. So here we just do two switches, two stack switches. So the last one, player 1 decides the valuation. Now when it comes to this formula, what happens is, if the formula is a disjunction of two subformulas, then player 0 is allowed to pick one subformula. Basically, player 0 says that this formula is true. There is a valuation for this formula. Player 1 actually is a refuter who tries to disprove him. So if there is a disjunction, this fellow says, okay, I will show that this fellow is true. And if the subformula is a conjunction of two subformulas, then player 1 is allowed to pick one of the subformulas. And he says, okay, show me this subformula is true now. Now when we come to the atomic formulas of this first order formula, what can you say about it? It will be of the form checking whether x3 is equal to x4 or x3 is less than x4 or not of x3 is less than x4. But that is very easy because now you know the ordering among these variables in your stack. So if you want to decide whether x3 is less than x4, you just need to see whether x4 comes before x3 while popping these variables in your stack. And if you want to check whether x3 is equal to x4, You just need to see if the plates are adjacent while you are popping from the stack. Is this clear? Yeah, equal to, you just have to pop and see if those plates are adjacent to each other, which are one on top of them. So yes, we have a non-elementary complexity for bounded phase, and bounded context is a much weaker structure than bounded phase, and we also get a decidability for bounded context. But bounded context is a weaker structure. So can we say anything about the complexity of bounded context? Does it really need a non-elementary lower bound? The answer happens to be no. I mean, we need a non-elementary lower bound. We need a non-elementary complexity for deciding even bounded context. Actually, what we will prove in this talk is a much stronger statement. We will say that model checking of, okay, our result actually is model checking EF fragment of CTL also needs non-elementary lower bound. But what I will be showing to you in this talk is model checking of CTL also requires non-elementary lower bound. That is what I will be showing to you in this talk.
Is it the total number of stacks that we use is only 2 always?
Yes, it does not depend on the stack.
Then just can you go to the previous?
This you mean?
Suppose I want, there are 4 elements, x1, x2, x3, x4.
Yes.
And I want to check the relation between x1 and x4.
Yeah, you can check. You are only.
After that, I want to check the relation between x2 and x3.
No, you never check everything. You just check one of the atomic subformulas. Because you have alternation, the player 1 can choose and ask you to show whether this is true. You don't have to sequentially check all the. Yeah, so I will briefly tell you the syntax of CTL. So CTL has your normal and not Ex of alpha, which means that from this position at the next, at the next successor, I have a successor where alpha is true. Ef of alpha means that there is a path to some vertex where alpha is true. Alpha until beta, alpha E until beta means there is a path where beta is true, and then along all the path alpha holds. And Eg of alpha is throughout the path alpha holds. I am hand waving this part because I assume all of us know this. I hope. So now the idea is to reduce, the halting problem of K X space bounded Turing machine to model checking of CTL formulas on configuration of a bounded context system. This is what we will prove in the sequel. For this, I need to define. Before this, I need to say that most of the ideas are borrowed from a result of Igor Valikovich, who proved that parity games on a higher order push-down system differentiate between this 0 and 1 and this 0 and 1. We will call this 0 and 1 yellow 0 and 1, this 0 and 1 red 0 and 1. Because we need to differentiate between the letter alphabet used for the topmost 2 counter from the alphabet used for 1 counter. So we'll just color them and say this is red 0 1 and this is yellow 0 and 1. Similarly, this is okay. So what is a K counter? K counter has some large number of bits, where each of the bit is annotated by a K minus 1 counter according to the. We will show how to encode the configuration of K X space Turing machine using K minus 1 counter. So what we do is, so this is the tape of the K X space Turing machine, and these are the configurations. We have a state and we have a pointer pointing to some cell in the Turing machine. So what we do is, we write down the tape exactly, put our K counter, except that now we have tape alphabets and Q on the topmost layer. So if I do this, then I am done. What do I need to do? I need to guess sequence of n configurations, where this is the initial configuration, this is the final configuration,
each of these configurations are valid or well formed, which means that it is a proper annotated, k-1 annotated configuration, and each of these configuration is successor of one another. So if I can ensure all these things, then I know that I have a witness for my Turing machine on that particular input. So for this, we will define some set of operations. We will define some set of operations on the counter and then show how to use this to actually determine what I showed in the previous slide. So first I will show what a max_val k is. So max_val k is an operation where you are given a k counter on top of your stack and you just have to decide whether it is the maximum value. How do you decide it is the maximum value? You just have to check whether the topmost, you are already given that this is a valid k counter. You just have to check whether all the blue letters are ones. Then it is the maximum value. Similarly, min_val, which is very easy. You just have to check that it is all the blue letters, the topmost counter variables are zeros. Now I have to check eq_val. What is eq_val operation? It says that I am given two k counters on top of adjacent stacks. I have two stacks. In one I have one k counter, other I have other k counter. Now I have to decide whether the values of this k counter is equal to the value of this k counter. So we have, and successor is also similar, except that you have to check whether value of one is greater than the value of the other. So when I say valid k, it means that I have one k counter sitting on top. It has proper 0 or 1 blue variables, and it has a valid k-1 counter annotating each of the bits. What do I mean by this? It means that I have a valid k-1 counter sitting here and its value is 0. It has a valid k-1 counter sitting here and it has the maximum value. And each of these k- counters are successors of each other. So I hope I am not going quite fast. Let me tell you how to write a CTL formula to decide this operator, which is eq_val of 1, which means that, I'll just recap for you what eq_val of 1 is. eq_val of 1 decides whether the one counter sitting on top is same as the one counter sitting here. Now I have to decide it using a bounded context. Model checking, I need to write a CTL formula which will verify that it is a valid, the one counter sitting on two stacks are equal. So I write a gadget for this. What does this gadget do? It basically pops some I values out of the stack on both the stacks basically, and it will check whether these two values are not the same.
I'll tell you why it is like this. So what this does is basically, so this is a one counter, remember, so you can actually count n. N is you can count n using your, you can count using your state space n, maximum of n. So you just pop I bits out of the first stack, I bits out of the second stack and check whether these two values are not the same. So this gadget actually does this. And this CTL formula ensures that this gadget actually finds a witness for these two counters not being equal. So basically this formula basically checks, tells that there is an I such that the values are different. Now it is eq_val of 1 if and only if this formula is not such. There is no such run which can actually extract me out a witness. So this is, so eq_val of 1 if and only if not of this pi equal to of 1.
So it non-deterministically picks an I and checks.
It non-deterministically picks an I, but then my CTL formula will branch and tell me there is no such, yeah. Now I will tell you how to do an eqval of k. So the idea is actually very similar. So you pop arbitrary number of k minus 1 counters and go to a particular state, then check that these two values are not the same, but the k minus 1 counter annotating them is the same. That means that we have found the exact right position in both the stacks because the k minus 1 counters annotating the bit is the same, which means that we have found the exact position, but the position differs in the value. So basically it checks that this position is not the same and these two counters are actually the same. But these two counters are actually the same can be determined by induction using eqval of k minus 1. Now my CTL formula actually checks for one such witness, which says that I have a position which is not valid and I have a k minus 1 counter which annotates it, which finds it is the right position. Now it is eqval of k if and only if not of this phi equal to of k is satisfied. Successor val is very similar to eqval except that we need to find the we need to examine the structure of the successor. Now one number is successor of other if there is a element which actually where the carry actually settles down. So we call that the pivot element. Basically you add 1, then it keeps making this 1 0 and then the carry actually settles down in the first 0 that occurs from the left. So we call this the pivot element and we know the structure of how the structure looks like to the right of the pivot element. We also know how the structure looks like to the left of pivot element. Left of pivot element is always the same. Now what we have to do is we have to see whether we have crossed the pivot element, whether we are in the pivot element or before the pivot element, and check whether the values correspondingly, whether it is the same, whether it is different. Now it's very easy. It's pretty much same as eqval of k, except that our checking the values will be slightly different. We can also write similar to eqval of k, we can write pi plus of k. So I am hand waving this. Now valid k is slightly more complicated, and here is where we will actually see the actual power of alternation. So what do we need to check for valid of k? We need to check whether last counter has a maximum value. That is easy because maximum value is just a regular property. You just have to keep popping and check whether all of it is 1. First counter is minimum value, which is also very easy because it's a regular property again. You just need to keep popping and check whether everything is 0. Each k minus 1 counter is valid. We get it by induction. The interesting part is to find adjacent counters or successors. We know successor val, but remember successor val only works if you have one counter on one stack, the other counter on other stack. This we get by induction. This we can actually use successor k minus 1, but successor k minus 1 only works when the counters are in adjacent stacks. Now I will show you how we can actually get one counter transferred to the other stack. I just want you to think, if it was a bounded phase, I have the power to copy, but bounded context does not allow me to copy. So I will have to use alternation here to actually copy the counter. So the idea is like this. Well, magically this z came here, but I'll tell you how it comes. So you actually randomly guess a counter, a k minus 1 counter. You can always validate whether it is a k minus 1 counter, and then now you can use eqval to check whether these two are the same. Once you check these two are the same, then I can actually throw away this z. So basically I use alternation to actually guess the value here, and then I can check whether these two are the same. I have already shown you how to check whether this value is same as this value. Now I can throw away the z, I can throw away the b, and then check whether z is a successor of x. So I can do all the operations that were listed in my previous slide, and I can also get a formula that checks whether this k counter is valid. Now we come back to our initial slide. So how do we check this using these operations? Again, if you take a C1 is initial configuration, it is easy. It is an initial configuration means I have to check this is a valid configuration, which is again on a single stack. It is very, I told you before that you can look at this as a K counter with topmost values from the tape or the, topmost values from the tape. So you can use the same trick as we did for minval to check whether this is the initial configuration. So I hope this is clear. Similarly for the final configuration. Note that this initial configuration and final configuration are just regular properties along with whatever we have seen earlier. And you can also check whether each configuration is well formed, similar to how we check the validity of a K counter. I showed you how to check the validity of a K counter. So it is same as actually checking validity of a K counter. So only tricky part is finding whether Ci plus 1 is successor of Ci. Well, here the successor means successor according to the Turing machine. These are configurations and I need to check whether this is a valid successor of this with respect to the Turing machine. So how do we find that this is a valid successor of this? What do we need to do? We need to check, there are two parts to it. There are three symbols in our configuration that actually takes part in our in the Turing machine move. Rest of the cells have to be the same. This is what I need to check. And we need to check whether these three are according to the transition. So this is what we need to check. So how do we check? First I will show you how to check that the part, I will check first show you how to check the part, the equality check. So what I do is I randomly find a position. Now I can know whether these two are the same position by checking whether this K minus 1 counter is the same. I can use eqval K minus 1 to check whether these two K minus 1 counters annotating this letter is the same. That means that we have actually found the right position in the configuration and I can check whether these two are the same. And that is not all. I also need to check whether this is not adjacent to Q. That I can check by popping this and checking whether the next alphabet is not Q. Because if it is adjacent to Q, then it is actually taking part in the transition. Similarly, if it is on the other side, I just have to ensure that I have popped the Q on the first stack and also another alphabet out, another cell out, and then I am into the region where I can check equality for these. Now how do I check whether these three are a proper valid transition? I mean this is actually a successor of this according to the Turing machine. So the idea is you first go and check whether this K minus 1 counter is same as this K minus 1 counter, which means that I have identified right positions on both the stacks. Now what I do is I pop 3 cells and remember the symbols that I have seen. Here also I pop 3 cells and remember the symbols that I have seen. And then I can check whether these 3 symbols are according to my Turing machine transition. So this is how I check the successor. Okay, now I'll go back here.
So it's K figuring in this. K should come somewhere. It's a K express Turing machine.
This is a K express Turing machine. We use exactly K bounded, K phase faces k context to decide this. Because we have val k, valid k minus 1, so we actually inductively go k times. So I just missed one thing here. So I will call this init config, init conf, final conf, successor conf, and valid conf. I will just give them names. So since I said this is easy to be done, that means that I have a CTL formula and I also have a gadget that decides this. So these gadgets I will call init conf, final conf, successor conf, and valid conf. So I have these gadgets init conf, final conf, valid conf, and successor conf. I build a new gadget. What will this gadget do? It starts from this blue position. Blue position guesses the first configuration or the initial configuration and goes to this yellow position, or green. It shows green in my keynote. Then it goes to this red position by putting C2. The red position has a loop. It actually generates lot many more configurations. And then at some point it decides that I have guessed all the configuration, I can go to the final configuration. So this is what this gadget does. Now what we do is we need to write a CTL formula that actually checks whether this is a valid sequence. So the CTL formula, I will not write the CTL formula, but I will show it to you in terms of the tree that this CTL formula generates. So what this says is, I start from this blue state, I go to this green state, and in this green state, I also validate whether it is a valid configuration and it is also an initial configuration. There are two branches. One which actually ensures that it is initial configuration, one which ensures that it is a valid configuration. Then in the next state I have red until I see a black, whenever I see a red, it ensures that it is successor configuration of the previous configuration and it is also a valid configuration, and it goes on until we reach a black. When we reach a black, it checks whether it is a final configuration, it is a valid configuration, it is also a successor configuration. So now I have a run which is a witness of my run of a Turing machine. So this actually proves that CTL requires non-elementary complexity. But we also can prove that it is enough to just have the EF fragment with the negation to prove, I mean, even EF fragment of CTL requires a non-elementary lower bound. And I thank you.